to episode number 148 of the LSR podcast. My name is Matt Brown, joined each and every week by the brightest minds in all of the gaming industry. With me, I have Adam Candy. I have Pat Evans making his debut here on the LSR pod. It only took 148 episodes, but damn it, we got him on the show. Subscribe, rate, and review, all the places that you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, all of that. Be sure and go in. You help us climb the charts, and we do appreciate that. We're going to talk our legislative crunch. We had some breaking news right before we got going here on the podcast, so we'll get the guys' thoughts on that. We'll talk about something about the offshores as well, an opinion piece that we have and what may or may not benefit or not benefit or what would happen with the getting rid of offshore books and stuff like that. But however, Adam, let's kick things off here about integrity. And let's kick things off here about, listen, at the end of the day, when the game changes, it does, in fact, then at that point change the integrity of the game, because there are people behind the scenes who may or may not know what is going on, as to where we are all kind of guessing as to what may or may not be going on. And this is in particular to Major League Baseball.
Go ahead and put a flag in my question for later as to why you stopped on debut and went to debut, because this is another one of those little Matt language quirks that I need to know more about. Let's talk about Major League Baseball first, because this is really what stoked the idea for me. And what you said there, Matt, about changes to the game that are announced, changes to the game that everyone knows about. Let's say, and the NBA went to a new ball this year. We all know that the NBA went to a new ball this year, right? But Major League Baseball, oh, Robbie Bobby Manfred, everything nefarious behind the scenes. We never know exactly what's happening. And what we've figured out, some from hearing from players, some from hearing from an astrophysicist, yes, an astrophysicist, is that not only have we determined that this year's Major League Baseball is clearly different than the baseballs of the past, but in the 2021 season, we now know that Major League Baseball was using two different balls during play. And a pitcher could have a foul ball go out of play with one type of ball and have the other type of ball thrown back to him for the next pitch. Now, I'm going to defer to our resident pitcher, Mr. Matt Brown, to talk about the actual physical effects of that, since he knows better than I do. But here's what gets my my knickers in a bunch. How's that how we want to put it?
Yes.
Let's say knickers in a bunch.
Grinds your gears.
It's what grinds my gears. Major League Baseball has 4 different sportsbook partners right now. And when you are involved in profiting from a sportsbook, perception becomes everything. And the perception problem here is major for the game of baseball, in that baseball is manipulating how the game is played in a way that not even its own players know about. They haven't announced it to anybody. They are testing out things with the ball and trying to say they're doing it in the name of consistency. Well, in the thread that I linked on my Twitter from Dr. Meredith Wills, the astrophysicist I named before, she said that this year we can already see that it's one of the least consistent baseballs that we've used over time instead of one of the most consistent. And like I said, last year we're using 2 different balls. So let me just give you some stats. And Matt, I have to hold my own nose. You might want to plug your ears. I'm going to use some trends data here.
Okay. Yeah.
So 2 years ago, 2020, if you look up which teams were profitable to the over-under in baseball, and profitable meaning 52.4% or better, you'll see that 12 teams profitable to the under, 11 teams profitable to the over. Okay. Last year, with the mix of balls, that went to only 9 teams profitable to the over, 12 to the under. Not a major number, not a major shift, still well within the margin of what you would expect to be error. Then go look at what we've seen this year so far. And again, it's a small sample of a month, but when the numbers are this far off, you have to at least look. So far this year, 18 Major League Baseball teams are profitable to the under. 1 is profitable to the over. This is a change that Major League Baseball needs to come fully clean in talking about. And Matt, like I said, I want you to tell the folks about what it means when a pitcher does not know what kind of ball they're going to get when it's thrown back to them.
Yeah, I mean, and you mentioned about the thread that you linked to. If you want to follow Adam on the Twitter machine, it's Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y. If you want to follow Pat, at Pat Evans. If you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. The thing is with this, and you're hearing anecdotally from some of these pitchers that some of the balls have like extremely raised laces. Some balls they're getting, the laces are not near as raised and the actual leather is much more slick. So you're having these pitchers out there that are trying to say like, yeah, I mean, from start to start, I don't necessarily know how good a control I'm going to have or where, if my slider is going to break as much or whatever and all this. So it is a massive, massive deal here. But, from a gambling perspective, Pat, I mean, Adam brought up the basketball thing. Well, listen, at the beginning of the NBA season, 3-point shooting was down because the players said they hated the ball and they were not used to the ball, and it took them a while to get used to the ball. Now, it increased over the course of the season because, again, you use something longer, you get used to it, and you start to shoot better. But at least we knew at the beginning of the season, NBA came out, they're using a new basketball this year. We all knew they were using a new basketball this year. We could easily point to, okay, this is why 3-point shooting percentages were down across the league at the beginning of the year. Well, with baseball, the biggest problem here from a gambling perspective, and everyone's going to point to us and say, you're overreacting. Oh my God, do you have to be so dramatic? But the thing is some people know and some people don't. Like it's not like the basketball where everybody knew, we knew, everyone knew it was a new bat. Somebody knows which baseball is going to be in play in various games. Somebody knows that in this game over here, it might be a different baseball and all this. So the fact that some people are privy to the information and other people are not, therein lies the problem.
Not knowing is a huge issue. If I don't know, how am I supposed to bet one way or the other if somebody knows something? It's a bad thing.
No, and to the point, Pat, we don't know who's betting, right? We don't know who's placing wagers, right? There are folks within Major League Baseball who know the answers to this. And Matt, I'll draw it back to what we've talked about with Warren Sharp when it comes to football before, right? The feature that we saw about Warren Sharp where he is suggesting plays to teams that he consults with, then seeing the play that he suggested for that week on the screen, full well knowing that that might be a type of play that affects something that's going to happen within the game. So I brought it up as well with the NHL because they also this week, and the NHL is even deeper in than Major League Baseball is, they own equity stakes in multiple sports books, right? The NHL, we only found out this week when the Vegas Golden Knights GM George McPhee went on a podcast and said, oh, by the way, our star player, Jack Eichel, was playing the last 6 weeks of the season with a broken thumb. Nobody knew. Nobody knew because the NHL systematically allows its teams to withhold information. Now, somebody in the Vegas Golden Knights ecosystem knows that. Players on other teams might know that. And the more you play telephone, tell a friend with where this information is going, eventually you're going to have a Calvin Ridley situation where the degrees of separation aren't far enough apart that you're going to cast the integrity of the game in a light that cannot be supported.
The reason that I keep that I was saying this, Adam, about like, hey, look, people are going to look at us and say, oh my God, you're overreacting. And why are you being so dramatic about this and all this with that? It's more of the deal of like, let's just close this off before we have to worry about this actually being an issue, right? Like, do you and I know there's probably somebody out there who knows that baseball A is being used in Park B and someone knows that baseball X is being used in Park Y? And like, do we know that? Probably. Can we prove that they use that information to make bets? We can't do any of that. However, the longer this goes on and the longer that this is a process and the longer that more people know about this and don't know about this and this might be used here and this might not be used here. And oh, by the way, after the All-Star break, they're going back to the juice ball and all the different stuff like that. That information, it can only be held on to for so long before, like you said, a call gets made here, who then call gets made there and all that. And now we've opened up this box that we don't have to open up. Just like why are we doing this?
It's also preventable. That's the thing. For anyone who wants to yell Chicken Little at us. This is easy. This isn't the hard stuff. The hard stuff is detecting a Calvin Ridley betting, which actually happened, right? I mean, through various systems actually happened. Something as simple as The company that is partnering with the sportsbooks is manipulating the baseball without telling anybody about it, including its own players. But then someone inside probably knows what's going on. This is not hard. And I don't understand from the MLB perspective why all the cloak and dagger. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It certainly doesn't, and it's so easy to prevent, like we're saying. And that's the thing that why I have been screaming about this for a few weeks now, and I know you have as well. It's just like, look, this is so easy. Say like, yeah, hey, guess what? We raised the seams on the baseball. It's not flying as far. P.S. You already know this anyway, but let us be transparent about it. Just be transparent about it. Don't make people literally have to go, by the way, balls that were hit at an exit velocity between 104 and 106 miles an hour with a launch angle between 32 and 36 degrees typically flies 401 feet. And this year it's flying 374 feet or whatever. Like, don't make us have to do that.
No. And by the way, if you want to follow along with this, you want to see the actual anecdotal evidence of this, I'm going to suggest a Twitter account that I know, Matt, you probably already know about, MLB Barrel Alert. And this account will show you every batter versus pitcher when you have, I think it's what's the exit velocity, over 100? I think
it's over 100. I think the threshold's 100.
I think it's any exit velocity over 100. It will show you the exit velocity. It will show you the launch angle. It will show you what the actual outcome of the at bat was, and then it will show you what the expected batting average was for a ball hit at that exit velocity at that launch angle. Look how many this year have an XBA of like 850 or 900 that are going 400 feet and dying on the track in a situation where they usually would have gone a lot farther.
Yeah, it's just like, we know it's all happening. It's the lack of transparency that is really just so annoying. And like we said, it just leaves the door open for nefarious activities to happen that none of us want to happen. So just don't let it happen. Pat, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we had some breaking news. We were going to start recording here about 10 minutes before we actually did, because we got some news that a new state is joining us here.
That's right. Governor Laura Kelly in Kansas signed the bill again, literally like 20 minutes ago, I guess probably half an hour ago now, to legalize sports betting, mobile and retail in Kansas. The law is effective July 1st. And before long, I was talking to regulators this week that are going to try their best to get it up and running by football season. Maybe not the start necessarily, but at some point during the NFL season. So all the people in Kansas can be real excited about that.
Adam, I guess if we look at here, it's kind of like, well, Kansas gets it done and they beat state X, state Y, state Z here. I mean, it's just like some of these, if you're sitting in some of these other states out there that we talk about so often on the podcast, where you're just going like, how are these other states getting up and going and are going to be up and going before we are?
Well, at state X, Y, or Z, or how about state MO? Because we're going to talk about Missouri here in a minute, and it's looking less and less possible for Missouri to get it done this year, and that's not very far away if they want to go over the border to Kansas and bet legally on the apps that are going to be available statewide. You're going to see that there are going to be multiple major operators who are going to have entry points into Kansas. It's a 10% tax rate, so it's going to be friendly to the operators there. And also, very importantly, and I'm curious to see how long this takes. Pat, I know you are too, because you've been following this. 80% of the revenue in Kansas that comes from sports betting, it's not going to be going to schools. It's not going to be going to roads. It's going to be going to a fund to attract, air quotes, a professional sports team. We know which professional sports team it is. It's the one that plays at Arrowhead Stadium with the $500 million quarterback. But it's very interesting to me that the state of Kansas is putting all of its eggs into that basket, because the moment that a new lease comes for Arrowhead or a new stadium gets approved in Missouri, they're going to have to reconfigure that law, because I doubt they're going to try to get the Royals.
Right. Pat, do we know, do we have any idea where that money may or may not go if it does not work to attract a sports team?
They've put in enough loopholes and whatnot that they can sweep it into the general fund if the Chiefs decide not to move, which there was a committee hearing in Missouri where an executive said, we're not looking to go anywhere anymore. So it was kind of a head scratcher when they threw that in the Kansas bill. But yeah, there's some loopholes around that there was also a Senate, I think it was a senator, might have been a rep. I was on vacation that week, but that said, this isn't going to create enough to start or to build a stadium. I mean, they're thinking $10 million a year. So that's $8 million a year. I don't think a stadium's ever been built for,
Hey, easy. That would have, for the Vegas contribution to, or the Nevada contribution to the Raiders, that only would have taken 75 years.
Yeah, so there we go. Yeah, not that big of a deal. It's very, very, very interesting that's how this is getting done. But that being said, if you are in Kansas right now, congrats. And again, like if it's not the beginning of football season, it looks like it will likely be during football season, and you probably only really care about that it's before the end of football season so that you get some of those games in. So congrats to you. And Adam kind of alluded to it here, Pat. What's going on in Missouri?
So Missouri's up against the deadline of Friday, May 13th. And we're recording this on May 12th, late in the day. It really looks not great for them. Going into, I don't know, maybe mid-April, it looked like at least one of Kansas or Missouri would go. Kansas did. And it seemed like if one of them went, the other one would go. Missouri. I was just talking to Eric Ramsey about this, that, I was doing Kansas, Missouri, Kentucky, and I learned so much about these borders that I keep mixing all the states up. But Missouri had a big coalition behind a proposal that was, all the professional sports teams. There's 6. The casinos, there's 6 operators, but there's 13 riverboat casinos and the major sportsbook operators. And it made it through the House. And a senator, Senator Denny Hoskins, had a competing proposal, and he took an adversarial role early in the committee hearings, and then eventually filibustered because he wanted to include video lottery terminals, and has kind of played hardball and really kind of derailed it seems. And it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to come to a compromise that the casinos, who originally backed the House proposal, it doesn't seem like they're going to come to a good compromise there.
Up in Minnesota, we kind of have a deal where it looks like one side might be able to vote this thing through, while it might not be as easy on the other side. What are we looking at up in Minnesota?
Today, as we're recording this, depending on when you're listening to it, the Minnesota House does appear like they're getting ready to vote it through. That's a tribal-only exclusive deal that would create 11 mobile licenses. But on the Senate side, it's gonna be an uphill battle. The Senate does not like the tribal-only aspect of it. They want to include the state's professional teams and racetracks. The tribe doesn't like that, and sources are telling me that's going to be a really hard thing to beat this year. Is those differences.
Adam, it seems like every time that we get to some of these states where there's the mixing of the tribal side and the non-tribal side, it seems like we're having a really, really, really tough time getting some compromises in there and getting everybody to kind of see things on the same page. This seems like a pattern here. I mean, obviously California, Florida come to mind. Here we are in Minnesota as well. And it's, a lot of it has to do, I imagine, right, with the fact that a lot of the tribal gaming has operated under, I'm not going to say complete autonomy, but they've had a lot of freedom. They've got a lot of perks and things like that. And I imagine they want those same perks and maybe even some of the same autonomy on the sports betting side of things.
The most important thing to keep in mind, Matt, when we talk about tribal gaming is that they don't need sports betting. Sports betting is maybe a little bit of an extra for them. They're very wary of online sports betting because they are of the mind that it will keep people from coming to their properties and gaming there and spending money on food and concerts and hotels and all of those things. And when it comes to states like you mentioned, like California and Minnesota, when tribes have exclusivity, when they have sovereignty over gaming, when everything has to run through them, when you're talking about something that is an amenity that brings in minimal revenue compared to slots, or some have table games, why would they want to reopen their compacts and have a discussion about that? They're looking at this and saying, well, we're going to do this on our terms because we negotiated to have this exclusivity. We negotiated to be the ones in control of this. Why would we do a deal that doesn't look anything like what we want? And what they want right now, as we see from the tribal proposal that's on the ballot in California, is that would be retail only for the first 5 years. They want to phase in mobile. They want time to see how sports betting affects their gaming. And from the tribal perspective, it's easy to understand because for many of these tribes, this is the most significant source of revenue they have to support their people. This is not a commercial enterprise. This is, when it comes to tribal gaming, you're talking about filling the budget for some of the tribal nations. And so that is a much different set of, let's say, motivations than it is for some of the commercial companies that want to come in and be part of it. So you're going to see these negotiations ongoing. I can understand why Minnesota, which has always been a state that we looked at and said, man, that's going to be a hard lift. I thought it was moving pretty easily for what I expected it to be, and now we're kind of where I thought we might end up.
Pat, we got one more M state to talk about here, and that's Maine. What is going on up there in Maine?
So talking about tribal sports betting, I've listened to the pod for a long time, and you guys have touched on that plenty. That Governor Janet Mills threw sports betting to the tribes as kind of a bigger piece of a tribal package. They don't have any gaming, so I think that might play into that there. But I talked with Milton Champion, the top regulator up there. That was last week that I talked to him. But he's trying to, it seems like, scare a few people and say they may not launch until 2024. He also then, in the same kind of breath, said it might launch by the Super Bowl. So it's going to be a really interesting process up there. And I think he just wants everybody to be on the same page as they work through it and not have too many disagreements, which would prolong it. And so that's, I think, why he was willing to stick his neck out and get people a little angry up front to make them happier in the end.
So if you were handicapping Maine, what are you feeling here? What are you thinking from all the stuff that you've heard and the people you've talked to?
I'll go late spring next year, like May.
All right. So there you heard it here first, and we're holding you to that. By the way,
Please don't.
all the predictions here on the podcast get logged, and we bring it back around whenever people are wrong. Not when they're right, only when they're wrong. We like to make fun of them, right? Adam? Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
Without question. By the way, I'm not sure we have a Mount Rushmore of names of people involved in U.S. sports betting, but if we ever have one, Milton Champion is my nominee.
I agree.
It's great. He answers the phone. This is Milt.
Milt Champ.
I love it. Adam, let's take us home here with one of our opinion pieces over on LSR, where we just kind of, our friend John Holden, who does these very, very, very well, was just kind of taking a look at, what would a federal offshore crackdown really kind of look like, and who would it actually benefit?
I really want to shout out John Holden here. The work he's been doing for us lately, while it's always good, has been really fantastic of late. And one of the articles that he wrote that I wanted to highlight was coming off the back of the American Gaming Association sending a letter to the Department of Justice last month asking them to crack down on offshore sportsbooks, specifically three of the bigger ones that are out there. And I mean, look, we've heard this sort of thing from the AGA before. We know that the DOJ is the one place that really has some sort of a hammer that it can try to wield against offshore sportsbooks that operate illegally within the United States. We saw that when Five Dimes wanted to try to go clean, that there was a settlement of more than $40 million that they paid to the DOJ to settle charges that never actually even got filed, just the results of investigations that were going on about Five Dimes and its operations within the U.S. So John brought up a great point and said, would doing some sort of federal crackdown on offshore sportsbooks really clear the field in any way for legal regulated sportsbooks? And his point was to say, if you don't have a legal regulated market that is attractive to bettors, then cracking down on offshores isn't going to make any difference, because in the end, if you whack one mole and it goes down, another mole is going to pop up, because there's a reason that you have the Bovadas of the world. It's because they can run a profitable enterprise from Costa Rica, Antigua, wherever they happen to be, someone's going to fill the void if you crack down on a particular sports book. I mean, give it to people in wire terms, right? Like you clean one drug dealer up off the block, someone else is going to come in there and have drugs to deal. Not that we are comparing sports betting to drugs. I just really like the wire. So when we talk about,
I mean, listen, one of the three that they named, right? I mean, one of the three they named is Bovada, that used to be Bodog. Right. And then like there was some stuff that went on there, they did a rename, rebranding. And then now here we are. And it's,
well,
Bovada,
I mean, look,
Bodog.
I snapshotted from a Calgary Flames game last month. Bodog.net is still on the boards in an ad at a Calgary Flames game. Like you can think you got them, but they're still around. Like, and that's the whole point that John Holden has, is that when you create a legal regulated market, you have to set it up in such a way that the legal sports books have incentive to provide competitive pricing, to provide competitive markets, to take serious limits, like to not ban bettors at the first sign of them being profitable. And we talk all the time about the fact that these books are running a business. They should reserve the right to do these things. Yes, they absolutely should. But having a legal regulated market that is attractive to those who have been offshore is a more complicated proposition than that. So I think he makes a really good point also that the DOJ, considering some of the things that have happened in the United States in the last 26 months, 28 months now, might have bigger fish to fry at the moment. So it's not necessarily a guarantee that, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is going to drop everything and say, oh my God, the AGA wants a crackdown. Do it now.
Yeah. Yeah. The three that they named were not surprising to me at all in Bovada, MyBookie, and Bet Online, because Bovada, as I just mentioned, it used to be Bodog. It's basically like the old school book for the general casual bettor. So it doesn't surprise me at all that is one that named. And then the other two are two that are actively still marketing inside the United States, which is why they would target those two as well, right? So when I saw Bovada, MyBookie, Bet Online, I'm like, all three of those make a ton of sense, right? It's like you target the biggest one that targeted all the casual bettors back in the day, and then the two that are still actively marketing inside the United States as we sit right now. So I totally get it, Pat. Whenever we kind of look at this, I mean, I do understand others would pop up. There's no doubt about it. I saw it back in the online poker days. I saw it in the sportsbook days, all the different stuff like that. However, if you were to cut off the legs of those three, it would take out a pretty massive part of at least from what I know, from a casual bettor who doesn't know any better and is betting on, some offshore book that he has no idea that he's actually even betting on an offshore book. Like if you took out Bovada, MyBookie, and Bet Online, that's a pretty big hit to that market.
100%. I have a little anecdote here that I love to share when talking about offshore stuff is when you're on Twitter, when you're following all these legalization, the state's trying to legalize. Whenever anything comes up, people will say, oh no, it's not legal. And then on Twitter, somebody will say, why aren't you legalizing it? I want to bet. Somebody will inevitably put MyBookie, Bovada, whatever up in there and say, it is legal. You can bet here. And it's like, well, how is there that disconnect still? But even in Kansas, it's like they were talking like it wasn't there was a guy who didn't want to legalize online sports betting because he thought that was going to create this big market that problem gamblers could go to, not realizing, he did not realize there already is a market for that anybody can access. It was bizarre.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no, it is. It's like and Adam, that's kind of like what we've talked about before. It's like, look, you and I, and I think Dustin to an extent have sat here and preached stuff about education. But, I think maybe we're too in the bubble when it comes to something like that, because that's probably not even a realistic thing of educating people on what is legal and what isn't legal. It probably does have to be at cutting these books off at the knees, because, us sitting here, even if we said, no, it's DraftKings and FanDuel and MGM and Caesars that are legal, and PointsBet, those are legal. These are not. parsing between the two and trying to distinguish like which legal, like it probably doesn't work, right?
No, it doesn't ultimately work. I see your point, though, about cutting off the legs of the three that are mentioned. And I think it comes back to, all right, I'm going to go way back in politics, like 20 years here, to discuss, when we discussed post 9/11 doing the invasion of Iraq. And the idea was, go in there and claim victory, right? And then it was, wait a second, now what? Right? Like, how do we rebuild the nation that has now been conquered, right? And that's kind of the same concept here, where it's like, you can go in and knock those offshores, off kilter, but then if you're just trying to filter everybody who comes out of that into the regulated market, if people are not pleased with what they find in the regulated market, then what was the point of doing it when you did it in the first place, right? Because you're just going to basically send those people back to whatever is the next offshore that pops up over time. So I get it. There could be some shock value in even going after one, and maybe then you get that education if there's a big enough news story about one of these offshores getting popped and people say, wait a second, why would they get in trouble? And that's where the education opportunity would come in. But in the long run, people are still going to go to what's convenient and what's right in front of them. And that's why, despite the fact that everyone in Canada et al. Has been complaining that they can't turn on their television without seeing a sports betting ad, well, that's kind of part of the education curve right now, too, is putting the legal ones in front of you, because it's been 25 years that the offshores have had the advantage of putting the illegal ones in front of you.
It really is. It really is. It is fascinating, and the article's great over there on legalsportsreport.com. So be sure and go in and read John's words on this. And again, everything we talk about here on the pod, you can find over at legalsportsreport.com as well. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, go in, subscribe, rate, review. We really do appreciate it. And if you're on the YouTube page, go ahead and hit the little subscribe button as well. We really do appreciate the support there as well. If you want to follow Adam at Adam Candy, 2 E's, no Y. You want to follow Pat at Pat Evans. If you hate yourself, you can follow me at Matt Brown M2. Until next week, talk to you guys later.